The story begins in a small, quiet town where a young girl named Emma lived with her mother, Sarah, and her stepfather, Mark. Emma was just 12 years old, a shy girl with a vivid imagination and a deep love for reading. She often spent hours lost in books, escaping to different worlds where she could forget about her worries. Life had seemed pretty normal until her mother married Mark, a man who was older and had a stern, quiet demeanor. Sarah, Emma's mother, was a warm and caring person who had always done her best to provide a good life for her daughter. After Emma's father left when she was just a toddler, Sarah had worked hard to raise her alone. She never remarried for years, focusing all her energy on Emma. But after some time, Sarah met Mark, and eventually they decided to marry. Emma had tried to be happy for her mother, though she couldn't shake a strange feeling about Mark. It wasn't that he was mean or cruel. There was just something about him that didn't sit right with Emma. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she felt it in the way he looked at her sometimes, or in the cold silence that filled the house whenever he was around. When Mark first moved in, things seemed fine. He was polite, even friendly at times, but Emma felt a certain distance between them. He never seemed to understand her, always too focused on his work or watching TV. Emma's mother, on the other hand, seemed more than happy. She often smiled brightly whenever Mark was around and would tell Emma how lucky they were to have him as part of their family. Emma wished she could share her mother's excitement, but deep down, she felt a knot in her stomach whenever Mark walked into the room. It wasn't that Emma hated him. No, it wasn't that simple. But there were moments, small moments, where something about his presence made her uneasy. She noticed how he would stand a little too close to her at times, his eyes lingering just a bit longer than necessary. Emma would quickly look away, feeling the strange discomfort that she couldn't explain to anyone, especially her mother. Sarah adored Mark, and Emma didn't want to ruin that for her. Over time, the little things began to pile up. Sometimes, Mark would make odd comments or jokes that made Emma feel awkward. He would smile at her in a way that didn't feel right. Emma began to dread coming home after school, and she would try to find reasons to stay at a friend's house or spend time in her room. She didn't know why she felt this way, but it was becoming harder to ignore. One day, after another uncomfortable encounter with Mark, Emma decided she needed to talk to her mother. She wasn't sure how to bring it up, but she knew she had to say something. She waited for the right moment, hoping that Sarah would understand. But when she finally mustered up the courage and told her mother that she didn't feel comfortable around Mark, Sarah brushed her off with a gentle laugh. "You're just being dramatic, sweetie," she said with a smile, thinking Emma was just going through a phase. Emma felt a wave of frustration, but she didn't know how to change her mother's mind. She tried to convince herself that it was all in her head, that maybe she was just overreacting. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Little did she know, her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. As the weeks passed, Emma began to feel more and more isolated in her own home. The discomfort she had tried to ignore was becoming harder to shake. She found herself constantly thinking about the things her stepfather did or said that made her feel uneasy. Sometimes it was something small like the way he would brush past her in the hallway, too close for comfort. Other times it was the little comments he would make that felt odd. He would often say things like, "You're growing up too fast," or "You've got your mother's looks now," always in a tone that made Emma feel like she was being watched. At first, Emma tried to brush these feelings aside. She told herself that maybe she was just being too sensitive, that it wasn't a big deal. But as time went on, she started to feel a constant knot in her stomach whenever Mark was around. She noticed her mother seemed completely blind to how Emma was feeling. Sarah was happy, always smiling and laughing when Mark was near, making Emma feel like an outsider in her own home. Emma didn't know who to talk to about it. She couldn't speak to her friends. They wouldn't understand, and she didn't want to scare them. Besides, it wasn't like anything terrible had happened yet. It was just the way Mark acted, the way he made her feel. But those feelings weren't normal. They made her feel trapped, as if she was stuck in a house full of strangers, pretending to be a family. One evening, when Emma sat down for dinner with her mother and Mark, she felt it again. The way Mark looked at her over the table made her stomach churn. It wasn't anything obvious, but the way he smiled and asked about her day made Emma feel uncomfortable. His gaze lingered just a second too long, and she quickly turned her attention to her plate. Sarah didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, though. She was busy talking about her day at work, chatting about her plans for the weekend, and Emma tried to follow along. But it was hard to focus when Mark's presence felt like a shadow looming over her. After that night, Emma decided that she couldn't keep ignoring her feelings any longer. She needed to tell her mother again, but this time she was going to explain it more clearly. She needed her mother to understand just how much Mark's behavior was affecting her. So, the next day after school, Emma waited for her mother to come home. She rehearsed what she would say, hoping to find the right words. When Sarah walked through the door, Emma tried to speak, but she felt a lump in her throat. She hesitated. How could she convince her mother that something wasn't right when Sarah always defended Mark? But Emma knew she had to try. Finally, she spoke up, her voice shaking. "Mom, I don't feel comfortable around Mark. There's something about him that makes me nervous." Sarah, who had just taken off her coat, smiled and patted Emma's head. "Oh, honey, it's just because you're not used to having a man around the house. You'll get used to it, I promise," she said, brushing off Emma's concerns as if they were nothing more than a passing phase. Emma wanted to argue, to tell her mother that this wasn't something she was imagining, but the words stuck in her throat. She felt so small, so unheard. All she could do was nod quietly, retreating to her room, and hope that someday things would get better. But deep down, Emma couldn't shake the growing fear that things weren't just going to magically fix themselves. As the days went by, Emma continued to keep her feelings to herself. She still dreaded coming home after school, knowing Mark would be there. She tried to avoid him as much as possible, spending time in her room or at a friend's house whenever she could. But no matter where she went, the unease followed her. It was becoming harder to pretend that everything was okay, and Emma could only wonder how much longer she could keep quiet about what was really happening. After days of feeling anxious and trapped in her own home, Emma finally reached a breaking point. She couldn't hold everything inside anymore. The unease that had been building up for weeks felt unbearable. Mark's presence seemed to fill every corner of the house, and Emma couldn't escape it. She knew she had to talk to her mother again, no matter how hard it might be. The house was quiet when Sarah came home from work that evening. Emma had been waiting for her, sitting on the couch, trying to find the courage to speak up. When Sarah walked in, she smiled at Emma, asking how her day had gone. Emma didn't respond immediately. She was too busy gathering her thoughts, trying to figure out how to say what she needed to. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah stopped in her tracks and looked at her daughter with a concerned expression. She could tell something was wrong, but didn't yet understand the depth of Emma's distress. "What is it, sweetie?" Sarah asked, setting her bag down on the counter. She walked over to sit next to Emma on the couch, her tone gentle and reassuring. Emma hesitated, feeling the weight of her words hanging in the air. She took a deep breath before continuing, hoping her mother would finally understand. "I don't feel safe when Mark is around. I don't know how to explain it, but something about him just makes me feel uncomfortable. It's like he's always watching me or saying things that make me feel strange," Emma said, her voice trembling as she spoke. She couldn't look her mother in the eye. It felt like a huge weight was pressing on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Sarah's expression shifted, but she didn't seem as concerned as Emma had hoped. Instead, she gave a soft chuckle, thinking Emma might just be feeling insecure or jealous of Mark's presence in the house. "Sweetie, I know it's hard having someone new around, but you need to give Mark a chance. He's a good man, and he cares about us. You're just going through a phase, I'm sure of it," Sarah said, brushing off Emma's worries with a smile. Emma's heart sank. She felt like her words had just disappeared into the air, unheard. "But Mom, it's more than that." She tried again, her voice more desperate now. "It's not just me being silly. I swear, something isn't right. I don't feel comfortable when he's near me. Please, you have to listen." But Sarah just shook her head. "I understand that it's hard, but you're overthinking things. Mark is a good man. You're probably just not used to him yet," Sarah repeated, not fully grasping how serious Emma's concerns were. Emma felt her frustration rising. She had tried so hard to explain, but her mother wasn't hearing her. It was as though Sarah was completely blind to the things Emma was feeling, to the unease that was slowly creeping into every part of her life. Emma wanted to scream, to make her mother see what she was going through, but she knew it would only cause more tension between them. So instead, she retreated back into her room, holding back tears as she closed the door behind her. The next few days passed in a blur. Emma tried to continue her routine as if everything was normal, but inside, she felt empty. Her mother and stepfather seemed to carry on with their lives, as if nothing had changed. The more Emma tried to ignore the growing unease, the worse it felt. She started avoiding family meals, finding excuses to stay away from Mark as much as possible. But no matter where she went, that same feeling of discomfort followed her. She didn't know what to do or how to get her mother to understand. Emma couldn't help but wonder if anyone would ever believe her, if she could ever make her mother see the truth. She began to feel more and more alone, trapped in a house with no way out. And all the while, Mark's presence seemed to loom larger in her life, a shadow that she couldn't escape. Emma spent most of the next few days in a daze. She tried to carry on as if nothing was wrong, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the deep, unsettling feelings inside her. No matter how much she told herself to keep quiet, no matter how much she tried to push the thoughts out of her mind, it felt like something was slowly eating away at her peace. At school, she pretended everything was fine, talking with her friends about homework or the latest gossip, but inside, it was hard to concentrate on anything. Her thoughts kept drifting back to what had been happening at home. Her room became her safe place, the only space where she felt in control. She spent hours there, reading books, doing homework, or simply staring out of her window, trying to block out the world. The sound of Mark's voice, or the sight of him sitting in the living room, only made her stomach churn. When he wasn't home, it felt like a small weight had been lifted, but she knew that it wouldn't last. As soon as he returned, everything would feel heavy again. Emma's relationship with her mother grew more distant with each passing day. Sarah was so wrapped up in her life with Mark that she didn't notice the change in her daughter. Emma longed for her mother's attention, for someone to listen to her, but whenever she tried to bring up how she was feeling, Sarah would quickly dismiss her concerns, reassuring her that everything was fine. It was as if Emma's worries were something that didn't matter, like they were just a phase that would eventually pass. One afternoon, when Emma came home from school, she decided she couldn't keep pretending any longer. She felt like she was suffocating under the weight of her own silence. Her mother was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Mark was nowhere to be seen, so Emma saw this as her chance. This time, she couldn't hold back. She knew she had to speak up, no matter how scared she was. With a deep breath, she walked into the kitchen where Sarah was busy chopping vegetables. "Mom, can we talk?" she asked quietly. Sarah looked up and smiled, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Of course, sweetie. What's on your mind?" Sarah said, her voice warm but distracted. Emma hesitated for a moment, then said, "I don't feel right, Mom. I don't feel safe when Mark's around. I really need you to understand. Something about him makes me uncomfortable. I don't know how else to explain it." Sarah's smile faded, but instead of showing concern, she raised an eyebrow. "Emma, we've talked about this already. You're just not used to him being around all the time. You know he loves you, and he wants the best for us. But Mom, it's more than that," Emma said, her voice shaky with emotion. "I can't explain it, but every time he's near me, I feel like I can't breathe. I feel like he's always watching me, like I'm in danger, even if he doesn't do anything. Please, just listen to me." Sarah's expression changed slightly, but she still didn't seem fully convinced. "I understand you're feeling uncomfortable, but I'm sure you're just overthinking things. Mark isn't like that. He's a good man." Emma felt a tear well up in her eye. She couldn't understand why her mother couldn't see what she was seeing. Why couldn't Sarah hear her? Why couldn't she see the changes in the way Mark acted? The small things, the strange way he smiled at her, the way he lingered just a little too close, the way he watched her when he thought no one was looking. Emma had tried to ignore it, but it was becoming impossible. "I just want you to believe me," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't live like this anymore." But Sarah, still focused on the task at hand, gave Emma a soft smile and patted her shoulder. "You're just stressed, sweetie. You'll see, everything's going to be fine." The words stung more than Emma could express. She felt as if her mother didn't even see her, like she was invisible. With her heart heavy, Emma turned and left the room. She felt more alone than ever, as if there was no one who could understand her, no one who would believe her. That evening, as Emma lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were only going to get worse. She knew that if she didn't do something soon, she might never find a way out of the house that had once felt so safe. The silence between her and her mother was deafening, and Emma felt like she was drowning in it. It was an ordinary evening when everything changed. Emma had spent another afternoon hiding away in her room, trying to distract herself with her books, her homework, anything to keep her mind off the tension in the house. Her stomach still churned whenever Mark was around, and the loneliness of feeling misunderstood by her mother weighed heavily on her. But that night, something felt different. Emma couldn't explain it, but she had a strange feeling that this time, things were going to be different. As the evening rolled in, Emma heard the sound of the front door opening. She knew Mark had just returned from work, and like always, she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She stayed in her room, listening to the muffled sound of their conversation downstairs. It was the usual small talk. Mark asking about Sarah's day, Sarah chatting about dinner plans. But to Emma, it felt as though everything was happening in slow motion. It was hard to breathe, like the walls of her room were closing in on her. She had planned to ignore the feeling, just as she always did. But tonight, it was different. The unease was too strong. Emma heard Mark's footsteps in the hallway, and she froze, her heart racing in her chest. For some reason, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. She felt like she needed to warn her mother or say something to stop it, but she didn't know how. Emma stepped out of her room and quietly walked toward the stairs, peering around the corner to see what was happening. She saw Mark standing in the living room, talking to Sarah, who was busy tidying up the kitchen. Mark was smiling, but Emma noticed how his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Something about the way he was looking at her mother made Emma uneasy, though she couldn't pinpoint why. For a moment, everything felt still. Emma stood there, watching, and then something caught her eye. Mark's gaze shifted, and for the first time, Emma felt like she was truly being seen, not in a loving, fatherly way, but in a way that made her skin crawl. The chill that ran down her spine was unmistakable. It was like an invisible weight pressing down on her chest. Without thinking, Emma quietly stepped back into the hallway, retreating to her room once again. Her heart was pounding in her ears. She couldn't stay in the same house as him anymore. Not like this. She couldn't let this feeling continue. She needed to tell her mother again, to make her understand. But the words felt trapped in her throat. What could she say? How could she make her mother believe her when she had already dismissed her feelings so many times? As Emma sat on her bed, her mind raced. It was becoming clear to her that she couldn't live like this much longer. She had been holding on, hoping that things would get better, that Mark would change, or that she would learn to feel comfortable again, but it wasn't happening. She realized that she had to do something now before it was too late. Suddenly, she heard a voice from downstairs, her mother calling her name. "Emma, come down here. Dinner's ready." Emma hesitated, the thought of sitting at the same table as Mark making her stomach twist. She wanted to refuse, to stay hidden in her room, but she knew she couldn't. Taking a deep breath, she walked downstairs, each step heavy with dread. As she entered the living room, she saw Mark sitting on the couch, his eyes locking onto hers with that same unsettling stare. Emma sat down at the table, trying to act normal, to keep her composure, but every part of her was screaming to run. Dinner passed in silence. Mark asked Emma how her day had been, but his questions felt distant, empty. Emma barely responded, her mind elsewhere. All she could think about was the way Mark had looked at her, the way his presence seemed to make the air in the room feel thick and suffocating. Every time he spoke, Emma's skin prickled. She just wanted to escape. After dinner, as the evening wore on, Emma could no longer ignore the feeling that had been creeping up on her for so long. The fear that she had tried to push away, the feeling of being trapped, overwhelmed her. It was like a switch had flipped inside her. She needed to act. She couldn't keep quiet anymore. That night, as the house fell into a quiet lull, Emma made a decision. She couldn't wait for her mother to see the truth on her own. She couldn't risk being ignored again. With trembling hands, she picked up her phone and texted her best friend, hoping that somehow telling someone would help. Maybe, just maybe, her friend would understand. She needed someone to believe her, someone to help her before everything spiraled out of control. That night, as Emma lay in bed, the weight of the decision she had just made settled over her. She couldn't sleep. Every little sound in the house made her heart race. The quiet hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, the distant sound of Mark's voice in the living room. It all made her skin crawl. Emma had spent so many nights trying to pretend everything was fine. But tonight, the truth was impossible to ignore. She had to do something. She had reached a point where staying quiet was no longer an option. With her phone in her hand, Emma stared at the message she had sent her best friend, Mia. Her fingers trembled as she reread the text. "Mia, I don't know who else to talk to, but I need help. I don't feel safe at home anymore. Can I talk to you?" Emma stared at the screen, waiting for a reply. She knew it was late, but she needed someone to listen. She couldn't take the feeling of being completely alone anymore. Minutes later, her phone buzzed with a reply. Mia had seen the message and instantly responded. "Of course. What's going on? Are you okay?" Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her. At least one person seemed to care. She quickly typed out her feelings, explaining the tension she had been living with, the discomfort she felt around Mark, and how her mother just didn't seem to understand. Maya replied almost immediately, telling Emma that she didn't have to go through this alone, and offering to come over the next day to talk in person. Emma felt a small sense of comfort knowing that Maya would be there for her, but she also felt a rush of fear. What if telling someone didn't help? What if her friend wouldn't believe her too? What if Mia thought she was overreacting, just like her mother? The thought of being rejected again made Emma's stomach twist, but she knew that she couldn't let those fears stop her. She had already felt invisible for too long, and if she didn't speak up, no one else would. The next morning, Emma woke up exhausted, but determined. Mia was coming over after school, and Emma knew this was her chance to finally share everything she had been holding in. She tried to push her nerves aside as she prepared for the day, but a part of her couldn't shake the anxiety that had settled in her chest. What would happen once Mia knew everything? Would Emma finally feel heard, or would things only get worse? At school, Emma couldn't focus. She barely heard the teachers' voices or the chatter of her classmates. Her mind was constantly on the conversation she was about to have. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Emma rushed out of the classroom, eager to see Mia. She felt a mix of emotions, fear, hope, and even a little bit of excitement. She was finally going to speak her truth, and no matter how scary it felt, she couldn't keep hiding it anymore. When Mia arrived at Emma's house that afternoon, the two girls went straight to Emma's room. They sat on the bed, and Emma could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she began to speak. "Mia, I've been feeling like something is really wrong at home. I can't explain it, but Mark makes me feel uncomfortable. I know Mom doesn't see it, but I can't stop feeling like there's something off. I need you to believe me," Emma said, her voice shaky with emotion. Mia listened intently, her eyes wide as Emma explained everything. The odd looks, the way Mark's presence always seemed to make her feel anxious, the way her mother didn't understand. Maya's silence made Emma feel vulnerable. But then Maya spoke. "Emma, I believe you," she said softly. "You don't have to go through this alone. I'm here for you, and we'll figure this out together." The relief Emma felt in that moment was overwhelming. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone was listening. Maya didn't think Emma was overreacting or imagining things. She believed her. Emma could finally breathe, knowing that someone else understood the fear and discomfort she had been living with. But even with Mia's support, Emma knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There was still so much to figure out, so many challenges ahead. But now, at least she didn't feel as if she was carrying the weight all by herself. For the first time in a long time, Emma had hope. She could finally start to make a plan, to take control of her life again. The days after Maya's visit passed in a blur. Emma felt a small but important shift within herself. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel as completely alone. She had someone who believed her, someone who understood the fear she had been carrying. But even with Mia's support, Emma knew there was still so much to face. She couldn't stay in this uncomfortable situation forever. She had to find a way to make her mother see what was happening. That weekend, Emma and Mia talked at length about what to do next. Emma had spent so long being quiet, afraid of being ignored, that she didn't know how to change the situation. She didn't want to upset her mother, but she couldn't keep living in fear. Mia was adamant that Emma should tell Sarah everything, every detail. She couldn't keep hiding her truth, especially with someone like Mark in the house. Maya believed Emma's voice deserved to be heard. As Emma sat in her room, contemplating everything Mia had said, her heart raced. She had already tried to talk to her mom, but it hadn't worked. Sarah had brushed her concerns aside. What if it happened again? What if her mom didn't believe her, even now? Emma's mind was swirling with questions, but deep down, she knew she couldn't live in silence any longer. The next morning, when Sarah asked if Emma wanted to spend the day out with her and Mark, Emma felt her stomach tighten. She didn't want to be around Mark, but she knew it was the perfect opportunity to have the conversation with her mom. If she didn't speak up now, she might never get the chance again. Taking a deep breath, Emma made up her mind. She would do it. She had to. As they all sat together in the living room, later that afternoon, Sarah and Mark chatting casually, Emma gathered every ounce of courage she could muster. It was now or never. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, and her heart thudded in her chest. She turned to Sarah, taking a deep breath. "Mom, I really need to talk to you. It's important." Sarah glanced over, her expression friendly but distracted. "What's going on, honey? You look serious." Emma could tell that Sarah wasn't fully paying attention, but this time, Emma didn't care. She had to say it. "Mom," Emma started, her voice shaking. "I'm really scared of Mark. I don't feel safe when he's around. I've tried to ignore it, but it's getting harder and harder. Every time he's near me, I feel so uncomfortable. I can't just pretend anymore. Please, Mom, you need to understand. I'm not making this up." Sarah paused, her smile faltering. Mark, who had been sitting on the opposite side of the room, immediately stood up. His gaze seemed to harden, but Emma kept her eyes on her mother. She couldn't look away. She couldn't back down. This was her chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. "I don't know why you're saying this," Sarah replied, her voice softer now, but there was still an edge of disbelief. "Mark has never done anything wrong. He's been nothing but kind to you." Emma shook her head. It's not just about what he does. It's the way he makes me feel. I can't explain it, but I feel like he's always watching me, like I can't escape him. It's been going on for weeks, and it's getting worse. I'm not trying to be difficult. I just need you to believe me." There was silence for a long moment. Emma's heart was pounding in her ears, but she held her ground. She had said her piece. Now all she could do was wait and hope. Sarah stared at Emma, her face a mix of confusion and concern. "I don't know, Emma. I just don't know why you're feeling like this. I'm sure you'll get used to him in time," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. She glanced at Mark, who stood by the door, his arms crossed, watching Emma carefully. Emma felt a pang of frustration. It was clear her mom wasn't fully understanding what she was saying. She wasn't ready to face the truth, and that hurt. But at least she had said it out loud. She had finally shared her fear. Mark's voice cut through the silence. "You know, Emma, it's not nice to make accusations without any proof," he said, his tone calm but cold. Emma could feel her stomach churn, but she didn't back down. "I'm not accusing anyone. I'm just telling you how I feel," she said, her voice steady. "I have every right to feel safe in my own home, and if that means speaking up, then that's what I'm going to do." The tension in the room was thick. Emma's words hung in the air, and she couldn't tell if they were making any difference. But she had spoken her truth, and for the first time, she didn't feel so alone. Even if her mother didn't fully understand yet, Emma knew she was beginning to see something. She had planted a seed, and all she could do now was wait and hope it would grow. The days following Emma's conversation with her mother felt like a slow-motion blur. Her words lingered in the air, hanging between her and Sarah, and although Emma wasn't sure her mother had fully understood her, she felt a sense of relief simply from having spoken her truth. But deep down, Emma knew there was still more to come. The tension in the house hadn't eased, and the uncomfortable feeling she had when Mark was around never seemed to go away. Still, she couldn't shake the sense that something had shifted. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. After the conversation, Emma tried to keep herself busy. Schoolwork, talking to Mia, and spending time in her room gave her some comfort, but the unease never completely left. She didn't know what else she could do, but she knew she couldn't just wait and hope for things to change on their own. Emma had taken the first step, and now she had to keep moving forward. Then, one evening, when Emma came home from school, she found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, looking unusually serious. Mark wasn't home yet, which gave Emma a small sense of relief, but she could tell something was about to happen. She felt a little nervous, but she knew it was time for the conversation to continue. "Emma, can we talk for a minute?" Sarah's voice was calm, but had a certain weight to it. Emma's heart began to race. Was her mother finally starting to listen? "Of course, Mom," Emma said, sitting down across from her. Her hands were trembling slightly, but she tried to keep her voice steady. Sarah sighed deeply, looking down at the table before meeting Emma's eyes. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, "and I'm still not sure what exactly you're feeling, but I can tell this is really bothering you." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Was this the breakthrough she had been waiting for? "I've been talking to Mark, too," Sarah continued, her voice a little softer now. "And I know he's never meant to make you feel uncomfortable. He cares about you, Emma. He really does." There was a pause, and Emma could feel her mom searching for the right words. "But I also know that I've been so busy with everything that I haven't been paying as much attention as I should. I'm sorry for that." Emma blinked, trying to process her mother's words. She didn't know if she should feel relieved or confused. Sarah was acknowledging her feelings, but was she truly seeing what Emma had been trying to explain? Or was this just another attempt to brush things under the rug? "I want you to know that I'm going to be more aware of what's going on at home," Sarah said, looking more determined now. "I don't want you to feel like you're alone in this. You're my daughter, and your safety and comfort are important to me. If there's anything you ever need to talk about, you can come to me." For the first time in a long time, Emma felt like her mother was truly listening. There was no dismissal in her voice, no rushing to defend Mark. Sarah was actually hearing her, and that made all the difference. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. "Thank you, Mom," Emma whispered, her voice catching slightly. She felt a wave of emotion surge through her as she looked at her mother, unsure if she had ever felt this understood before. It was a relief, but also a little scary, because Emma knew that things wouldn't be the same anymore. That evening after dinner, Sarah sat down with Emma and began asking her more about how she had been feeling. It wasn't just about Mark anymore. It was about Emma's world, her thoughts, and her well-being. It felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Emma finally felt like she was being heard, like she wasn't alone in this fight. Over the next few weeks, things gradually began to change in the house. Sarah was more attentive, asking Emma how she was doing, making sure she felt comfortable, and keeping a closer eye on things. Emma didn't feel as anxious as she had before. Mark's presence still made her uneasy, but she no longer felt completely trapped in silence. One evening, Sarah pulled Emma aside. "I've been talking with Mark again, and I think it's time for him to understand that some boundaries need to be respected," Sarah said gently. "I know this is difficult, but you're my priority, Emma. We'll figure it out." For Emma, hearing those words meant everything. She knew things weren't perfect, and there was still work to be done. But now she had the support she had longed for. Sarah was finally seeing things from her perspective, and that made all the difference. The road ahead wasn't clear, and Emma knew there would still be challenges, but she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. She had spoken up, and things were changing. She could take a deep breath, knowing she had taken control of her own life again. It wasn't just about being heard. It was about being believed and knowing that she deserved to feel safe, respected, and valued.